So I guess the other part of that question that really fascinates me is we're obviously talking from an Australian context and we have a certain, set of ethics that we apply. When you look at overseas companies and you look at the sort of corporate cultures of overseas companies, are you still just applying the framework, the Australian ethical framework, for want of a better term? Or are you making accommodations at all for different cultures and countries and anything like that?
Yeah, so we are, using the Australian ethical framework in a global sense because that's where our investors are from, and but it does raise some interesting issues. So one of these we sort of had play out over the last year, which was we made a decision that we no longer wanted to invest in listed companies that had all male boards, and it's one of those issues where there's a strong ethical argument for gender diversity on boards and the benefits that brings from an ethical perspective, but a really strong financial argument as well. Like there's been research for years and years and years showing that gender diverse boards produce better financial outcomes for investors. So it's this sort of great issue where there's this overlap between it being a clear ethical positive, but also being backed up by a clear financial positive as well. So in an Australian context, we identified the handful of Australian companies we were invested in that had all male boards still and said, we think you should have a plan to introduce gender diversity to your board. And if you don't achieve that by this date, then we'll divest of our holding. The ASX, the big side of the ASX is pretty good on gender diversity nowadays. And the handful of companies we had left, 2 of them appointed a female director to their boards, 2 of them didn't. So we sold out of those 2 that didn't. So it was one of those times where we felt like we got a good outcome for our engagement with 2 of those companies. And equally, those other 2 companies showed that they weren't interested in the benefits of adding diversity to the board, and we're happy not to be a shareholder in those companies anymore. We then went to apply this to a global context. And what we found was that there was 8 companies in our global portfolio that had all male boards, and they were all based in Japan. And just completely different governance in Japan, where issues of any type of diversity on boards and qualification for board positions just is completely different. And so we sort of had this choice where the screen is really important, but equally, it doesn't feel great to knock a lot of companies from one country out of your portfolio. But we decided it was very important to our investors to be consistent with this. Issues of gender equality are really important to our members, and it was important for us to follow through. So the approach we took was we contacted all of those Japanese companies. We wrote to them, had our letters translated into Japanese as well, just talking through the benefits of gender diversity on their boards, why it was important to us as a shareholder in their business, and gave them a long lead time, almost a year, to try and appoint at least 1 female director to their boards. These are companies in Japan that generally have huge boards, 25, 30 people, but no females. And they all tend to be sort of males aged, 70 plus. And ultimately, none of them added a female directors to their boards. So just a few months ago, we decided that we would sell out of those companies. So we're a little less exposed to Japan now. But it was great to be able to make that announcement that we were the first super fund to completely exclude investments in listed companies with all male boards. And we've seen other institutional investors follow us down that path as well. So it's nice that, we're able to make a bit of a difference with some companies, but also maybe have an influence on some other funds as well and into how they approach issues of gender equality and board diversity.